Have we started? We have. Great. Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to the Leeds Digital Festival, and welcome to this special Opera North hosted discussion, which is about all things digital and cultural, to do with the performing arts, to do with lockdown, to do with what we were learning before lockdown and what we've been learning during it. It's been a huge time of huge change already. Leading up, before lockdown was already a time of exponential change in the cultural and performing arts sector and arts sector generally, as we embrace the digital revolution. And across the sector, there was enormous investment and a lot of change happening. And then lockdown happened, and that's both accelerated some things and put the brakes on other things. And what we're going to do this afternoon is we're going to walk through what some of those changes have been. We've got quite a long session. We've got a couple of hours, 2.5 hours to have this conversation. We will have a break in the middle, you'll be pleased to know, a kind of comfort break or whatever you need to do. And we've broken it down into 3 main sections. The first part that we'll be looking at will be mostly around capture and distribution of live performance or of gallery exhibitions and so on, how those are shared with wider audiences. The second section we'll be looking at will be around the use of digital as part of the live experience. And then in the third part, we'll be looking at the digital native and work which is made primarily for digital platforms. To get us started and as a kind of scene setter, I've asked Mann, who's the managing director of Substrakt, to give us his sense of what he's been learning both before lockdown and during it. Substrakt, for those of you who don't know, Substrakt is a web agency. It's based out of Birmingham and London. It's a web agency working exclusively across the arts, cultural sector and the creative sector in North America and in Europe. Ash and his team have worked with a lot of the larger cultural organisations, the Globe Theatre, Shakespeare's Globe, the Hepworth, closer to home, Opera North, even closer to my home, and the Sage Gateshead. So across the north, but also nationally and internationally. It's an interesting cross-section that they work with between art galleries, museums, and the performing arts sectors. So that'd be interesting to get Ash's views on that. So Ash, if you could give us a kind of 10-minute provocation to get us started and give us some scene setting, that would be terrific. Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. So hi everyone, as Dom said, my name's Ash and I've been asked to set the scene. So I'm going to try and describe the response as I've seen it from the cultural sector to the coronavirus. I'll also try to set the wider context a bit and offer some thoughts on what I think is working and some of the issues that the culture sector might want to start trying to address around digital. Hopefully that will provide something for people to think about or perhaps vehemently disagree with. And then later on we can have a discussion about that. The impact of the coronavirus has been, to reuse an already overused word, unprecedented. However, the impact has been more keenly felt in some areas of life than others. I've just returned from Germany and I'm not sure I'd want to be responsible for an airport right now, but just as heavily affected, perhaps even more so, have been cultural organisations for whom bringing people together in close proximity, often in slightly cramped Victorian buildings, is their primary aim. And overnight in March, thanks to a slightly vaguely worded statement from our ever precise Prime Minister, theatres, concert halls, art centres, museums and galleries were forced to close their doors. And as a result, thousands of performances were cancelled, and millions of pounds worth of tickets were refunded. And for a few days, there was an acute cultural vacuum. But then things started to happen, and almost without exception, they started to happen online, they started to happen digitally. And it's worth saying that unprecedented though the impact on culture has been, I'm not sure it was entirely unpredictable. the need to suddenly pivot to digital as the only way to make and distribute work, the only way to reach and engage with audiences, and the only way to generate revenue has thrown the focus onto a range of issues that the sector has long grappled with without finding much in the way of answers. Whether that is about the digital audience experience, or indeed who that digital audience is and where to find and reach them, questions of format, the specifics of artist contracts, questions around IP, understanding what works in terms of distribution models and partners, how to collaborate with digital artists, digital literacy, how to measure digital success, or what digital culture could or should indeed look like. These are all issues that have been discussed at great length in the sector for the past decade or more, without anyone really having made much progress towards concrete answers and solutions. And in a way, I can understand that. The culture sector is a precarious sector, certainly in the UK. It relies on a probably increasingly unsustainable combination of ever diminishing public money, the generosity of sponsors and donors, as well as having to sell lots and lots of tickets to audiences. So whilst digital has been acknowledged as being important and certainly a useful way to sell tickets and market shows, it has perhaps been less frequently directly engaged with as the existential threat it has proven to be for so many other industries. Digital typically in the cultural sector, certainly in the UK, Europe, Australia and North America, i.e. the sectors I'm regularly engaged with, is usually a subset of the marketing function of an organization. It does not usually intersect meaningfully with an organization's artistic activity, although we will hear about that from some of the other speakers today. And rarely, if ever, is it represented in the leadership of an organization. Whilst you increasingly see CTOs, CPOs, CDOs, and other digital or technology-focused leadership roles in organizations of all shapes and sizes in other sectors, these roles simply do not exist in the cultural sector in any real way. Sarah is perhaps the exception that proves the rule on that. And where you do see examples of cultural organizations doing things that are innovative or especially digital, they usually stem from some sort of exceptional financial circumstances, whether that's a generous sponsor, such as the case of the Berlin Philharmonic's Digital Concert Hall, which is sponsored by Deutsche Bank, the raiding of an endowment fund, which the Met Opera in New York did to fund their cinema broadcast program, or funding from a central funding body combined with global brand awareness, which the National Theatre enjoyed when they were setting up their MT Live program of cinema broadcasts. In short, the cultural sector around the world has, for the most part, not seen the worth in investing digital to a sizable degree, or certainly they haven't felt sure enough about a return on that initial investment. However, in that context, the coronavirus and lockdown and everything that has stemmed from that presents an interesting challenge. And I would say, with my optimist hat on, an opportunity. Now, the immediate response to the lockdown was perhaps the one that you would expect. Cultural organizations use digital as the distribution channel for more or less unchanged forms of culture. And that existed in the shape of recordings of live performances from organizations such as the National Theatre and the Met, curators giving tours of exhibitions, which the Royal Academy and the National Gallery did, or actors giving monologues from their kitchens, bedrooms and living rooms, of which there were far too many to count. This saw cultural organizations doing their usual thing, their usual art, but pushing it out through mostly video for people to access via platforms such as YouTube. But on the whole, the form remained unchanged. In truth, I don't think this was a huge departure from some of the event cinema approach we've seen with increasing regularity from an increasing number of organizations over the past decade. And aside from a few notable exceptions, this type of response was most easily achieved by very large organizations who had a pre-existing back catalogue of recordings that they could easily distribute, or very small organizations who could quickly switch modes of delivery to do something more digital, more agile. With this type of activity, I'm not sure that anyone could really or did really give the audience experience a huge amount of thought. In this model, the audience was a fairly passive consumer, the silent receiver of content that had been pushed out through the internet pipes for people to find. And as I've said before, I'm not sure the form of the art changed that much either. On the whole, it was much the same as you would get if you were sat in the same physical space as the thing that was happening. Digital was the delivery method, and everything else remained fairly unchanged. And to be honest, I think that's fine. Organizations had little or no time to be able to quickly mount a response to the lockdown. And I think that this activity probably has a place in the longer term. There is demonstrably an audience for it. Look at the millions of people around the world who enjoyed the productions that were broadcast as part of the NT at Home initiative. People who would perhaps never have visited the National Theatre in person or never had the opportunity to attend one of the National Theatre's cinema broadcasts. There is undeniably a democratizing effect of this sort of distribution. However, I would say it's not without issue. The organizations who are best placed to make the most of this type of approach are those who have high brand awareness and a catalogue of recordings. And these organizations are usually large and wealthy. They are usually white-led organizations, and they are usually organizations that operate from the English-speaking global West. And a model that can only be exploited by organizations like this is going to exacerbate some of the issues that the cultural sector already has around financial resilience and diversity. Because on the whole, this model does not make much financial sense in the way it has existed over the past 6 or 7 months. The content we've seen made available in this way has mostly been made available to audiences at no cost, and in doing so has perhaps created an expectation that digital cultural content will always be available for free. You have seen some moves from that position with things like the Old Vics in Camera initiative, where live performances have been broadcast online from the theatre, with access to that content being granted to audience members who have bought tickets for about the same amount that you might expect to pay to visit the theatre in person. But on the whole, these experiences have been free. Which is why it's been interesting to see that as lockdown dragged on, you started to see more thoughtful ways of organisations starting to engage with the potential of digital technologies and digital audiences. Because the fact is that digital creates a fundamentally different audience experience, a different dynamic between the art and the audience. Your audience is no longer captive. Your audience has far more agency over dictating the experience of how they consume your art. And if you want them to, the audience can more easily engage with other audience members or even the artists without spoiling or interrupting the performance. Some examples of this included the Royal Court's My White Best Friend and Other Letters Left Unsaid, that had a cast doing live readings of raw, provocative letters over Zoom, and the strictly limited audience who joined the Zoom call were encouraged to leave their webcams on so that their reactions to what was being said could be seen and responded to by the performers. Another example, I'm not sure how intentional it was, but it was interesting to see. As part of the NT at Home broadcasts, I watched the Bridge Theatre's production of A Midsummer Night's Dream. People in the live chat from around the world were having a lively discussion in tandem with the broadcast. And watching someone in Guinea help someone in India understand the nuance of a particular scene was fascinating. There have been other less seismic shifts in how folks have engaged with their audiences. SF Jazz in San Francisco have started a Fridays at 5 members initiative that does the live broadcast thing alongside sharing specially formulated cocktail recipes and the opportunity to chat with artists. And Emma Rice's Wise Children's Company's upcoming performances of Romantics Anonymous as a digital tour will start each performance, which is hosted by a different tour venue in a different city, with a specially written prologue for each of those cities. And I think it will be fascinating to see how this area of audience experience continues to evolve when you have far less direct control over that experience than you would in a live setting. On the other side of the coin, I've been really interested to see how digital has affected the form and the shape of the thing itself. I know Chris, one of our other speakers, has done an immersive online detective game called Plymouth Point, which was put together by a collective called Swamp Motel. And we've seen theatre shows which were performed far before COVID being reimagined as video podcasts, such as with Chris Good's User Not Found. And there have been some other interesting examples of people looking at the creative, artistic possibilities of audio. Complicité's The Encounter made use of binaural audio to rave reviews, and Darkfield's Double was an audio-only play that explored the unsettling possibilities of sound design. So in terms of what seems to be working, certainly the examples of the Old Vic and the National Theatre have shown us that there is, currently at least, a substantial audience who want to watch theatre performances broadcast online, particularly theatre from high-profile organisations and with high-profile casting, which is perhaps not a surprise. And that some of those audiences will pay for those experiences, whether that's through buying tickets, in the example of the Old Vic, or through donations, as they have done with the National Theatre. Whether or not that audience will persist beyond the current crisis remains to be seen. I also know that the National Theatre programme in particular was only possible because lots of creatives and artists very generously waived fees that they were entitled to in order for it to happen. And I'm not sure that's a particularly sustainable or ethical model to try and persist with. Elsewhere, numerous organisations have seen significant levels of engagement with family and skills-focused workshop activities, whether that's Opera North with their Couch to Chorus initiative, which saw about 1,500 people learning to sing with members of the Opera North Chorus via Zoom lessons, or Los Angeles Groundlings Theatre and their famous improv classes, which they're now delivering online to people around the world. Shakespeare's Globe moved their family-focused Telling Tales festival online and have seen huge demand, and the Children's Theatre Company in Minneapolis have moved their annual theatre training classes for children online as a virtual academy. Even Laura Marling has been giving guitar lessons via Instagram. And of course, there are the more obviously born digital experiences that I've outlined earlier, and we'll hear a bit more about later. And I think this more immersive and gamified approach is something that has been around for a while, but COVID has perhaps opened this type of work up to people who wouldn't previously have considered or even known about it. So what would I say from my personal perspective that I think the sector should try to focus on to try and capitalize on some of the good stuff that we've seen and to start trying to address some of the issues and challenges I've sketched out? I would say, know your enemy. Ignorance is not an excuse, and online artistic activity did not start in 2020. Digital literacy has not really been a requirement to lead a cultural organisation. I think increasingly that does need to change. It would be great to see more collaboration with digital experts, cross-pollination between traditional cultural practices and with those artists who are digital natives. I think funding for digital initiatives over the past 15 years has at best been patchy and at worst muddled and ill-conceived. I'd hope to see organisations focused on funding and supporting the sector making a better job of identifying the core sector-wide needs and addressing the capacity gaps around things like artistic development, performance capture, intellectual property, contracting, distribution and commercial models. I would like people to look at the structure of their teams. I don't think digital should sit solely in marketing. It could and should cut across everything you do. Operational structures aren't particularly sexy, but they are vital for success. And thinking about audiences, your digital audience may not be the same as your physical one. They may, and they probably do, exist in different locations. They will have different motivations and needs, and they may respond to different work. Find them and understand them. I think the primacy of the in-venue audience experience probably needs to shift. And you need to understand what success looks like around your digital work. You know, who do you want to reach? How will you judge if it's successful? Is something being seen by 500 highly engaged people more meaningful than cursory attention from 5,000? What sort of role does this work play in the broader context of your organization? The question of monetization, which we're going to talk about in a moment, is crucial. I think the time has passed when digital activity can be funded as an afterthought, but equally it needs to start paying its way, especially if physical visitors and audiences can't or won't return in their pre-COVID numbers for the next 12, 18 months, or maybe at all. What does that gap in revenue look like? And what other sources can cultural organisations draw on to fill it? And what might those models be? Is it about micropayments, subscriptions, memberships, one-offs? And lastly, I think that there's sometimes a tendency to look at the big content platforms, Netflix, Amazon. Ultimately, what we do in the cultural sector is slightly different to what they do. I don't think we should be trying to match the glossy production values of a Netflix. Whilst the reality is that audience expectations are stratospheric when it comes to digital content, I think that cultural organisations should be able to offer something different in terms of storytelling, form, engagement, emotion. So that's my scene setting. There are some thoughts that I'm sure people will violently disagree with, and I would love to hear those disagreements. Over to you, Dom.
Thanks, Ash. That's really, really helpful. That's well, we could just unpick that for the next 2 hours. But we've got some other fantastic speakers lined up that I want to hear from as well. Somebody mentioned in the chat that there will be an opportunity towards the tail end of this afternoon for a kind of roundtable question and answer thing. So do please, if you're watching or listening to this, send in your questions on that chat, and we'll be collating them as we go along. I want to move straight on to Fiona Morris, however. So in our first kind of proper section of this, where we're looking at the kind of history and trajectory of capture and distribution, which Ash obviously talked about there quite a lot as well. Fiona Morris is the Chief Executive and the Creative Director of The Space. The Space is an agency that supports the UK arts and cultural sector to make great art, to reach new audiences. It also has a big role that it plays in terms of training and capacity building for the cultural organisations that it works with. Opera North has been very lucky to work with The Space on a couple of captures of the Ring cycle and the Rite of not the Rite of Spring, the Trouble in Tahiti of Bernstein, which the Space helped us to film those. And across the North, The Space has also worked with Northern Ballet, with Phoenix Dance Theatre, with Sheffield Crucible Theatre on their Kes production. So it's got they haven't been in any way London biased. So we're grateful to for that, Fiona. Fiona, I wonder if you can just walk us into what kind of pre-lockdown, what was the direction of travel you were most aware of?
Hi everyone, and thanks to Ash as well for covering such an enormous amount in that opening. So yeah, lots of thoughts about that, Ash, and in agreement, I would say. And I think, yeah, in response to Dom's question, I guess traditionally when I came to the Space 4 years ago, and we are talking about capture here, so we are talking about the facsimile of the long form performance when that might sit in a more portable form digitally, because the Space is involved in lots of other areas of commissioning, but talking about how you take the live to other environments and other audiences. I think there was a feeling across the sector that the people who had been involved in this area, and really that is the live event cinema producers, were the NT, the RSC, the Royal Opera House, and so for the vast majority of arts organisations, I think the feeling was, it's not for us. We don't have the money for that. We don't have the audience. We don't have the marquee value for that. And I think alongside that, there were two other things that were competing negatively. One was that if it's not actually sitting in front of it live, it's not quite what you want it to be. It's a second tier, it's a reheated, it's something that perhaps isn't quite what the intention for the piece originally was. And then I think there's a third thing which came up with a lot of organisations, which quite often comes from boards and trustees, which I refer to as the trophy cabinet line, which is, oh, we must have a film. Oh, we must persuade the BBC to make a documentary. Oh, we must tell them that this has to go out somewhere, without any real digging into why you would want to do something. So I think, and this remains the same, the big issue for us with all our commissioned organisations was to say, it's all about audience, particularly if you're going to publish online. That was always a volatile, unpredictable landscape. And my word, has it become even more so in recent times. So you've got to be incredibly targeted about the audiences you want to reach. I think you've got to be really focused on what you want to say to them. If you've jumped up and down outside that digital window and they turn around to look, be really, really clear about why this piece of work is the one that you think speaks to your core mission, why it is, what it is as part of a sustainable delivery to that audience in that format. So there's a lot to consider around legacy matters. consider why that audience might not be coming to your live work, and then think about which platforms, how do you make it more accessible? And then I think just generally think about what the other benefits are to being in that slightly more high profile position when you have published work online, because if you've actually worked at it hard, you are much more profiled in it. I'm going to ask this some clips, Dom. I don't know if this is the moment. I just thought it might be nice to see a couple of the commissions.
Let's see something.
So Natasha, thank you. You can play both of them back to back, Natasha.
Answer the question, yes or no. Were you ever left alone with Artemisia Gentileschi?
I don't remember. I have no memory of it. I mean, this is ridiculous. I do have other worries besides these, like the study of my profession, the amount of work that I have to do for the Pope.
Thanks. Natasha, if we can just go on straight on to key change, and then I'll talk back to them both.
This is the prison. This is supposed to be a touching story about two women who meet in prison and become friends, so...
Oh. It starts before prison?
Aye, at the beginning.
I went to a refuge when my jaw was broken, and after it stamped on my head.
If she hadn't ran, she'd be dead now. Keep your voice down.
No, I won't.
Oh, please forgive me my human way.
She'll have to toughen up.
Well, don't.
Can it be soft?
Not in here.
People take advantage, you know the ones.
The ones that cry.
For I count day by day.
You know that we've all been told.
No. I want kids, so I've had enough. Got a nice lad on the outside, got me eye in the prize.
And this load is too heavy to carry home.
I am not a victim. I am a survivor.
Sleep so long.
Thank you very much. So yeah, so I just wanted to include both of those clips because those are both very much pre-COVID. They are both very small theatre ensemble groups, one based in Newcastle, a group of women who work mainly around testimonial work about the presence of women within the prison system, and Breach Theatre, really young creative team who have been making lots of shows, but in that kind of, in that sort of alternative Edinburgh circuit, but really, really strong, powerful shows. And so, you know, I just want to show them as examples of really good work. They've both had fantastic reach. And I think they've both had, and I can talk a little bit more, but Dom, I'm going to let you ask me another question about the benefits of them.
Yeah, those are really good. And the quality, the quality of that is really interesting, isn't it? Yeah, it does raise everything. Yeah, I suppose the question for me is how those organize, how does the space, what would the space consider to be a success, and what does the organization consider to be a success, and are they the same thing?
They're definitely the same thing, because we don't want to impose that on an organization. I don't know, you know, I can meet them, we can talk to them, we can, well, we used to be able to meet them, now I can e-meet them. We can talk about what's important, but the really, really crucial thing for me is to say, what's your core mission? What is it that makes you stand out, that you want, the conversations that you want to be having with audiences that extend beyond any one piece of work? Because one piece of work digitally, however well you you promote it, however well you market it and create trailers and marketing assets, it might still not come onto someone's radar. So it is important to kind of be clear that your digital strategy is across a range of content that you're publishing online and doesn't hinge on any one piece. So I think in terms of outcomes, I mean, what was fascinating, so with OpenClasp, I think what was amazing about that was they did that, you know, that cost just under £70,000. So that was quite a lot for an organisation of that size. It is way less than any of those larger organisations are spending on their captures. I mean, it's by a factor of about 25% of a lot of those other budgets. But they wanted to do something that they could publish internationally on UN action against violence against women and girls. And it was brilliant. It went out. They've had about 40,000 views of that. So it's done that thing of raising profile. The most unforeseen thing was that their local police, the Durham police, saw it in the live stream and came to them to say, that work is amazing. Can you work with us to create some testimony-based pieces that you can work with our young officers, because we have real issues about how to train them to recognise domestic violence when they're called out to kind of attend things going on, and sort of how should they handle it, what do they need to look for. And so they did that. That's an income stream from them, for them, that has allowed them to do more work. And actually their latest piece of work is something that the Durham Police Force have actually put money into, because it came out of that initial piece of work. Now, they didn't know that, but that online presence and profile is the thing that gave them that opportunity.
I think that's so interesting, and it does, you know, one of the things it chimes back to in what Ash was saying is about it's about collaboration, deeper collaboration, more unexpected collaborations, and cross-sectoral collaborations coming in more and more. That's really fascinating. I'm going to turn to yes I am. I'm going to turn to Alex. Ramseyer-Bache now. Alex, but Fiona, we're going to come back for post-COVID, if that's all right, or post-lockdown, or whatever I don't know, post-something, post-Christmas probably. Alex, Alex is the senior multimedia producer at Opera North, and has been very closely involved in the capture of opera at Opera North. He's also a filmmaker in his own right. He's made the 2012 film We Are Poets, about the Leeds Young Authors trip to the US for the Poetry Slam. So he's a filmmaker as well as a producer for Opera North. Alex, I wonder if you can just talk us through a little bit about, again, pre-lockdown, what was going on at Opera North in terms of capture and distribution?
Yeah, sure. Hello, everyone. Can you hear me okay? I'm using these fancy ear pod things, which a bit sketchy sometimes. Thanks, Ash, and to Dom and to Fiona, actually, because straight away so many interesting points to get into. So yeah, the context with Opera North, I think probably what Ash was saying about the size of an organisation and then how they respond. You know, Opera North probably sits somewhere in the middle of that, where we don't capture all of our work to be shown in its entirety. I think what we've got to this point now is we agreed a few years back that we'd try to do one a year, and then we've carried that through for the last 4 or 5 years now. And before that was really kicked off with the Ring cycle. So I sit in the communications team at Opera North, and most of my work is to make short form versions of, you know, very long pieces of opera in order to sell tickets, really. And then whereas really the where video tends to hit hardest really is where you are showing an entire performance, whether that be a full piece or a scene or an aria, a song, whatever that might be. We do work in the Howard Assembly Room, as some people will know, and if you show a piece of an artist as a full track, that's the stuff that usually has a bit more longevity beyond the selling of tickets. So anyway, the big project for us, which really got things going, was the Ring cycle. So that's Richard Wagner's epic 15-hour thing, and so we teamed up with the Space at that point to really show it off. And what Fiona was saying was interesting about the audience, and if you're going to decide to record a piece and show it, you know, a multi-camera recording, properly produced, then it's really deciding on the piece and why, a real why, before you just want to show off your work. And the ring cycle was that really, because we were at that point, that was our exemplar piece really. We're one of the only companies who, you know, decided to try and stage it all in one go. You know, it's 4 huge operas and all that. So it was a real showcase piece, and it went down really well. So that was with the space, but that was with an external company, came in and did a multi-camera shoot. I then supported it with basically the promotional stuff around it, and that then set off a bit of a chain for us, I think, where we looked at it and thought, well, this is great, and people responded very, very well to it. And that initially sat on BBC, and then had different lives in different guises on various platforms, and made its way through to now where it sits on our website as its own dedicated platform, which is great. So you can come onto the Up and Off website and have all the information about the ring cycle, the various chapters, and so I think that's where we've adapted well. So because we necessarily can't have our back catalogue to draw on, like what Ash was saying with some of the larger organisations, where as lockdown kicked in, we can draw on some of that past work and reappropriate it and redistribute. So we had a few. So moving beyond the ring cycle, just quickly, just so you can kind of get up to date. We then, the next year, we did a shorter piece, Trouble in Tahiti, I think. This year, earlier this year, or was it last year? We did The Rite of Spring, which was a dance piece, and then we did Turn of the Screw. And these were all, the idea was that we'd have one a year, and then we'd find distribution for it. And they've done really well, and I think that's where our capacity's been for now. But what we'll do is, if we show, just contextualize the ring cycle. I think we've got the trailer somewhere, just a little burst.
This is your work. The trailer is your work, Alex. Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, nice.
Yes. Sorry, yeah.
Yeah, no, I know you want to show the clip of Rite of Spring as well, but what strikes me about that, and it was true of the long, you know, the 15-hour film as well, is trying to capture a filmicness. So it's not just a capture of the live; it's actually making a film, and I think that's really interesting.
Yeah, that's it. And I know there is it's when we're putting on our work, I think some organisations have decided to bring cameras in and have them in their buildings and then capture everything, whereas we're having to individually work with filmmakers, and those filmmakers will bring their vision to it, and that can be, some can be straight captures and some can be more immersive, and you can try new work. And for instance, we worked for Turn of the Screw early this year with trying fixed cameras that were then remotely operated, and it was a really interesting trial. And then with The Rite of Spring, which was something that we did in-house, just a small team of ourselves in-house. This was again trying I suppose a different way of capturing, where we are capturing the work as it was live, and we've only got one go at it. But just trying out a few new angles, and also bringing in this combination, because one thing that working at Opera North that I've noticed a lot really and love to see is the orchestra. So in this clip we don't get to see the orchestra because I'm currently editing it actually at the moment. But there's a dance piece, but we've also got a character of the orchestra in there with it. And maybe we could show a little clip of that which, as an example of something we're working on. That was just a little taster of that, which something hopefully that'll see the light of day in a few months. Yeah, yeah.
No, go on.
No, I suppose what I was trying to get into really is where we've and I know I'm trying to establish the scene before lockdown. So I think we've kind of generally agreed that we'll try and do a capture, as it were, maybe once a year, and then we'd increase on that, noticing where and how we can do it and where we can improve upon it. And then something I think we've been able to do, because we can adapt fairly quickly, is to take moments, sections of work, or different angles of the work, and make new work in response to the lockdown. Where, in the case of the ring cycle, we did one angle of the ring cycle was this conductor cam. So it was just a shot of the conductor for the whole 15 hours, and we were able to take that as a separate film and then promote that out and have a platform for that, and then take sections of that. So I think that's where, I mean, opera certainly lends itself well to that, because it's scene based and you can choose particular scenes. I think that's where our response to lockdown kind of was good. We drew on the catalogue that we had, which wasn't lots. We had 4 works really, and then we created I think we boosted our website really, and to be able to host that, and made it more a place to come to enjoy our work, and then just found inventive ways to represent that work. Which I know moves us into lockdown section.
Yeah, let's just pause you there. I think that's really interesting, the kind of repackaging and reusing of existing materials. Fiona, if you're still there, I wonder if you want to come back. There you are. Well, so coming back to, so you left us just at the point of lockdown. So what's the space picked up on over the period? So Ash is talking about, at Opera North, it's kind of recycling and reusing existing material. Is that something that you're seeing elsewhere, or are people trying to make new things despite the constraints?
I think any and all of the above. I guess the weird thing for us at the point of lockdown was, having spent 4 years telling everybody what digital could mean as an opportunity and to consider it. We then found ourselves for about a month sort of pleading with people to stop it, because there was just this rush to plaster the virtual walls with any content from any period of your organization's history. And I think I described it as looking at a very badly fly-posted side street in Edinburgh, and just to really ask people to just take a beat here, think about think about what has just happened to your audiences. You know, digital had been the thing that people would reach for to try and maybe diversify audiences, to challenge themselves about the demographic for their content. And actually in that first bit of lockdown, it was like, no, these are your existing audiences. You know, they've just been cut off from you. They can't come through your doors. So take a moment, take a breath, think about what you know of who they are, where they are, how you can have a conversation with them. So there was that very initial moment. I think in the conversations that we've had subsequently, and Dom, you've been involved in some of those, the kind of the leading sort of bits of feedback that we're feeding around to everybody, I think now, is to say, look, this is all going to be about personalization. This is going to be about making the consumer feel that you have come to them, you've seen them, you want them to participate in something. That if you're going to be presenting this content online, you have to consider the issues of atmosphere. What happens when you can't hear your neighbor next to you laugh or gasp, or, you know, so what do you do to try and make solitary experience something that is not isolating but is inclusive? How can you create atmosphere around it? And then I think also, you know, the other one, and we've been talking about this, is what, if you're going to publish content online, how do you give yourself permission to convene audiences elsewhere? So what I mean by that is, you know, we now have a rule of 6, which does limit who and what and where people can gather to look at content. But that doesn't mean you can't, if you want to publish content online, if it's about, for example, we did a great project with Hull Truck last year with their pantomime, going into care homes and children's wards, live streaming. That was the original idea. It foundered a bit because we had lots of people saying they wanted to participate in this, couldn't get a date when it could all happen. And our head of distribution rang me one day and said, can I ring the care homes and ask them if they prefer a DVD or a USB stick? And I kind of went, yeah, of course, ask them. And they all went, oh my God, thank you. Could you do that? Because the idea that a care home with dementia patients 3 weeks in advance was going to be able to say that at 4:30 on a Friday, I've got a member of staff who can be in that sitting room with all those residents with enough connectivity to get the live stream, know how to put it on. No, they can't do that. So simplify the offer. Think about how you can convene those groups. If it's book clubs, music societies, village halls, you know, there will be opportunities for us to consider how people can collaborate and enjoy work together. So I think those were our 3 big bits. And I think people have been looking at where they can reversion archive materials. And I think there is an opportunity there. But I think if you're going to do it, you have to look at what the monetization options are. And those are massively, you know, unclear at this moment. We have had this weird period of 7 months of anyone wanting to consume cultural content having to look for it online. So that has had a shift in audience behaviours. Chris will talk to that, but we don't know what's going to stick. We already saw the minute the summer came, numbers started dropping again. I think we're now back in semi-lockdown or whatever this is called, and it will increase again. But if the offer is about monetization, there's an expectation of quality, there's an expectation of service. What platform are you going to use? Where's your shop window? These are all questions that we haven't yet got the fullest answers to.
Fiona, I want to come on to monetization and I want to bring Chris in, but did you want to show another clip before I do that?
I wanted, yeah, because I was going to say, because we had the Culture in Quarantine commissioning round as soon as the lockdown started with the BBC, and those have been amazing films, and I'm so proud of all the artists. But in fact, I was just going to show 2 other ones because I wanted to be kind of inclusive again of much smaller, kind of agile organisations. So yeah, there's a clip here from Theatre Uncut and Bubble, which was a social media staged, cast, rehearsed and staged production. And then also just to have a little call out for the podcast, please don't forget the Humble podcast, or indeed audio only, is a perfectly effective way of communicating with audiences. You don't always have to be going to the expense of video. So yeah, Natasha, if we could play the other 2 clips, that would be great. Thank you.
So if you put on your headphones,
and if I were to breathe in your ear, your brain would tell you that I was really breathing in your ear, and it might even start to get hot.
He didn't speak to me. I think he spoke to me without words. Just as Barnacle undid my spell by running counterclockwise, I could be the crack between here and there. The crack through which another...
I'm blocking you.
Typical feminazi BS.
Hannah can say what she wants about killing men, but after Slutgate she can hardly defend it as a misunderstood joke, can she?
It's totally different.
How?
When I gave this group of audio pieces the general title Place Prints, I was thinking of how that term is usually understood. A brief sighting one might have of a moment from the past, somehow printing through into the now.
Hidden voices and haunted landscapes are conjured up in 10 unique dramatic stories from the imagination of visionary writer David Rudkin. Join a stellar cast including Juliet Stevenson, Toby Jones, Josie Lawrence and Stephen Ray, among many others, on an enlightening journey across the British Isles with this dramatic audio cycle, produced by New Perspectives Theatre Company, Place Prints. 10 journeys that will transform your sense of the landscape around you.
Thank you. And the reason I wanted to play both of those is because they were all, in fact, there was Complicity, which came in, which was from an earlier thought, but Complicity is a really good illustration of things as well. But both Place Prints and Bubble were less than, well, in fact, Place Prints was £5,000 and Bubble was 10. So just to say, you know, the unit cost, you can be imaginative, you can do things, you can keep it simpler with the audiences. But yeah, they're really interesting. And the Bubble went out live on Facebook, and then that had kind of university student groups around the world that were then live, had a live Q&A running alongside it, and has proved, you know, really, really, really good in terms of numbers and engagement.
I love podcasts, so I think that's really good to have a shout out for the old school, particularly in these times. You know, it's so easy to download and go for your run or go for your walk or whatever. It's very user friendly form. Chris, thanks for joining us. Chris is, for those who don't know, Chris is the head of One Further, which is a digital analytics organisation. They've worked with the National Gallery, with the V&A, with English National Opera, with Sadler's Wells. Not yet with Opera North, I don't think, but I'm sure
you won't have me. You got
okay.
Taste apparently.
I wanted with Ash, Chris, Alex, Fiona, and other panelists, do please chip in as well. I want to talk about monetization a little bit, because as we get deeper into lockdown, and Alex, you were talking about recycling things that are already in the bank, repackaging them, repurposing them. It's harder and harder to, even being able to make a film is really hard because people can't be in the same room as each other. So what's going to happen with monetization? How can that rush to digital that Ash was describing, that happened at the beginning of lockdown, everybody, and Fiona, you were talking about it being like a poster board with everybody just chucking everything at it. It's now got a little bit of breathing space, a little bit of time to think about how we actually make some money out of doing that, because people can't afford to just give everything away. I wonder what who wants to start on that? Chris, we haven't heard from you yet. Talk to us a bit about monetization.
Go on then. So, I mean, it's one of the things that we all love working in this sector. It's just so complicated. And I think every organization is trying to pick their path through the opportunities that are on offer. And you have to look mostly beyond the art sector to see the organizations that are excelling with digital business models. But there are those out there, whether it's there's a big trend at the moment in direct-to-consumer brands, which if I was a touring theatre company or opera company, I would certainly be having a look at what they were doing. And then on the other hand, we've got just all the constraints that people are operating under. Some of those, Rodolfo, who's commented in the chat, pointed out the effect that just having venues and buildings to maintain is having on organisations. A few months ago, it was a fantastic asset to have a place to welcome people into. Now, for many organisations with lovely Frank Matcham designed grade 2 listed buildings. They're a millstone, and any activity that you're looking to do doesn't just need to wash its own face, it needs to prop up the rest of the infrastructure that an organization has. So that's going to have a dampening effect on what's going on. The other thing is that, I mean, I think Fiona summarized very well what happened in the first flush of digital content being released back in March and early April. And there was a sense that people were putting content out as a means for carrying out their public service remit, and not looking to monetize on that immediately. Some of that because this work has been funded by the public purse in the first place, and so it's not right to monetize that in the same way. It's subsidized so that it can reach the maximum number of people. But then, the expectations that then creates the unevenness across the sector. It's hard enough when people are used to West End theatre and thinking it's a great big commercial engine, and then thinking that applies for their local council run theatre as well. There are horribly mixed messages going out across the sector that we need to deal with.
Great, thank you. Ash.
Yeah, so I think the question of monetization is an interesting one. I mean, I do a podcast where I try and talk to lots of different people about digital things, and I recently spoke to Aled John, who's the head of membership strategy at Condé Nast, and they recently launched Vogue Business, which is a digital-only, paid-for subscription publication. And that came out of data that they held about their customer base that showed that there was an interest in this type of content. They profiled the types of customers, and they created a digital product around that. I think that historically, the way that cultural product is created in this country, the audience and audience needs and what the audience is willing to pay for is perhaps not as big a part of the consideration as it might be. But I think, as Fiona indicated when she was talking, that in a digital context, you have to be ruthless and sort of ruthlessly focused and ruthlessly specific on who your users are, what they want, and what they'll pay for. So I was reading an article with Mark Thompson, ex-BBC, now outgoing CEO of the New York Times, and they've massively grown their digital revenue over the past, his tenure. And the way that they've done that is by identifying lots and lots of very specific digital products. So, for example, New York Times Cookery is its own product with its own subscriber base. Their crossword puzzle is its own digital product with its own subscriber base. And I certainly haven't seen yet any cultural organizations thinking about how to put out digital work in as specific a way. And the wonderful thing about the internet is there is an audience for almost everything out there. And if you can be really specific and compelling in talking about what you're offering, there will be people out there who will pay for it. Is my
I try and back in on that one. It's a really interesting article and it's well worth reading. I think the cautionary tale there is that if you look at digital incomes for news publications, the New York Times has gone in one direction, and many other smaller publications, their revenues have gone the other way. And if we wanted to draw parallels to who is the New York Times of the UK cultural sector and who is the Arkansas Inquirer, there are going to be concerns from a lot of people there. One of the things the internet does is it concentrates attention and money in smaller places, in a relatively small number of places. So it's a really interesting article, and there's loads to learn from it. But some will read it with a bit of a cautionary eye on it as well.
Alex, oh sorry, Fiona, go on.
No, I was just going to say, I think also it's a good illustration, and yeah, I agree, it's a really interesting article. And but it's interesting because the New York Times is a publisher, So in order to present online, it takes its cost base and then can work out what that consumer per user cost needs to be to it, and actually where it can save money by not having to print it. The problem we've got in the cultural sector is we're having to learn to be publishers, take on the costs of being publishers, i.e. making the digital asset and then distributing, marketing, and actually putting it up online in a secure way with some ability to claim money back that doesn't kind of exist for most organisations. And underlying it, there is the cost of, so for Opera North, what, 90 in the orchestra, 30 in the chorus, 30 on the stage, 5 backstage creating the vision, for the ballet companies, for the theatre companies. You know, there are an awful lot of people, and Ash, you mentioned it, you know, it's been fine in the first flush of all of this pandemic for those artists to very generously say, okay, fine, have it and put it up there. But going forward, if we're looking at commercial models, they have to be recompensed for this. This is their livelihood. This is what they do for a living. So it's that thing of like, yes, it's everything that the New York Times says, plus everything else that sits underneath it. And what we've got to be really clear about is what the costs of this are, because we've been doing a piece of work on it at the moment, trying to look at some of these things. And even just to have that shop window publishing website, you know, most of the models that Vimeo and others are offering out there are extraordinarily expensive. I mean, we've been quoted, and I won't mention which arts organization it is, but somebody who's been doing some has been doing subscription concerts over the summer. The Vimeo platform that they've got that sitting on is £40,000 a year to license. Now, so that's just the thing that you're playing it on. That's not the making platform, of it. Yeah. So, you know, so we've got to be a lot more clear-sighted about what the whole cost of this is, and then work out what the mixture of public subsidy and revenue might be to make it happen more often.
Yeah, I mean, we've experienced, you know, if you look at COVID as a brick wall, we've had 10 years worth of not making decisions and not looking at this squashed into the last 6 months, really. Yeah. Which, as you say, if we'd started thinking about this 10 years ago, then perhaps we'd be in a better situation. That didn't happen. So we need to try and the reality is lots of cultural organizations are not going to exist on the other side of this. That is the sad reality of this.
Let's not go there yet, Ash.
No, sorry.
Still the first hour, mate. Alex, are you finding, is Opera North finding that it's reaching different audiences and therefore potentially new income streams through lockdown and through the work it's sharing on lockdown? Are people donating even if they're not buying it?
Well, that's the thing, because if you look at monetization, you know, I know donations don't necessarily sit within that, but that's where we've got to. I think we haven't tried actually an awful lot of monetization of our work. You know, I think previously we've either been funded like with the space to produce the work, and then it was always about finding a distribution platform to share it and share it largely for free. So we're, as Ash mentioned, right in the still having that discussion. But with donations, an interesting one. We saw such a rocket of donations coming in, and you know, in response to lockdown, which was lovely. And I mean, it's massive. We've got it here. I think we got 53k of donations just over the first few months. And then on top of that, also we did the Couch to Chorus project, which is fantastic. So there's a lot of people, 1,500 people signed up to learn to sing, and that was a pay-as-you-feel arrangement. And so it wasn't setting a cost and understanding what we would gain from that, but it was it was a big organizational thing, but fairly cheap, I suppose, if you want to call it, to produce. Lots of organization, but not not an awful lot of technical know-how and all that to produce, and that raised a lot. I think it was something, even in donations, it was £28,000 in donations just from people being engaged in that. So that's where we've seen monetization, if you want to call it that, but that's more from a donation point of view. And we're now we're still exploring how the platforms, because you know, where we look at the next thing that we might capture, and those pre-existing platforms and which ones might work. But I think largely we've stuck to the idea of trying to just show the work, really, and find platforms for it rather than finding a way to make money from it. Though, you know, that's obviously going to need to change as well, and reaction to what Fiona was saying with the arrangements with the artists. You know, it's got to be addressed as well. We're very kindly, you know, our orchestra and chorus, you know, the kind of the media rights was understood that we'd be a different period of time, and we'd understand that, and we might have to use work in a different way, but that's going to have to be readdressed, and so we're going to have to find some way.
Yeah, I thought what Ash was saying at the beginning about you know, the people that are really seem to be trying to do the monetize, you know, the pay-per-view essentially are the big names. So, you know, the Nick Cave gig and Laura Marling and the starry Old Vic casts. You can, you know, I think we're all watching that very carefully, aren't we, to see how do we get involved in that. Guys, I'm going to have to, I'm running a bit late, so I'm going to pause the conversation. But I think monetization is going to be something we keep coming back to this afternoon. So let's keep that in mind. Thanks Fiona, thanks Chris, thanks Alex, thanks Ash. Stay with us. We're just going to move on to a different topic, which is going to be looking at how we the trajectory, again, to use that word, of how live performance is engaging with digital as part of the live experience, or rather how it was before, well, when you could have audiences. Sarah Ellis, I'm delighted. Oh, there she is. Hi, Sarah.
Hello.
Sarah Ellis is Director of Digital Development for the Royal Shakespeare Company. Sarah, I was reading this morning, won the Creative Industries Council Cross-Industry Collaboration Award in 2016. So congratulations, 4 years late for that. I didn't know that. It's fantastic. And also, Sarah is part of an AHRC funded kind of research and development program, which is also about skills development and training and so on. So I'm really interested in that too. As you've joined us, Esther and Shanaz, I will introduce you both here, and then we can just start the conversation. So Esther Richardson is Artistic Director and Joint Chief Executive of Pilot Theatre, who are based in New York, international touring theatre company, specialising and committed to making work for young adults, for children and young adults, and children, young people and young adults, I'm going to say. And has always, I think Pilot have always engaged with digital media, partly because your audience require you to, I would think. So that's going to be really interesting.
Yeah, exactly.
And we've also got Shanaz Gulzar with us. Shanaz is a digital installation artist with one hand, and with the other hand a theatre designer. So straddles both those worlds of live and digital for live. She describes herself as working at the intersection between new technology, film, theatre, place and identity. And has recently, congratulations to you as well, recently been appointed as chair of Bradford 2025 bid to be UK City of Culture. So fantastic panel. Sarah, you're going to start us, I think, with, again, pre-lockdown, what you were up to and what you were noticing other people were up to in terms of this merging of digital with live.
That's right. Thanks, Dominic, and thanks for the previous panel. It's lovely to sort of come from that moment, and I hope our conversation will sort of pick up some of those key areas too. So pre-lockdown, my goodness, that feels such a long time ago, because we're dealing in cat years right now. I find that my role at the RSC is within the artistic team, and I've been there nearly 10 years now. And pre-lockdown, a lot of my work was delivering an artistic piece of work that responded to Shakespeare mainly, but also looking at collaboration as a form of making it. So not using the D word exclusively, but to also examine how we could extend a theatre making toolkit. So how could we bring these new tools and technologies into how we made theatre, and to increase the skills and the output of what we do. And so over that time, we did a series of work, but culminating, I think, in our larger scale work, which was the Tempest back in 2016, which was a genuine collaboration, a cross-sector collaboration between the RSC, Intel, and the Imaginarium Studios. And for the first time on a live stage, we put real-time motion capture of a character performing in that production. And I think, forgive me if you've seen this video before, it's a video that's been around a bit, but it's a good demonstration just to give context. And so I've got a video now. If we feel it's a bit too long, don't worry about cutting, of the Tempest and what we were trying to achieve.
3 years ago, we spotted that 2016 was going to be a big Shakespeare year. It was Shakespeare's 400th anniversary of his death, and the Royal Shakespeare Company needed to put on something pretty spectacular. We needed to try and match the magic of Shakespeare's imagination.
I got cast a long time ago for this new production of The Tempest, and the RSC is the home of Shakespeare. Not many actors get the chance to do things like this.
It's taken the best part of 2 years for us to develop this technology with Intel and create an avatar to make Ariel fly, to create a sense of the island being a place where magic was possible.
I boarded the King's ship. You get to see 2 fully fledged performances, one of which is an actor and another is this apparition can fly around the space.
To dive into the fire, to ride.
We have unlimited versions of Ariel. We're able to change his form in many different ways.
We are creating for the first time on stage, real-time, live facial performance capture, and that is quite an extraordinary leap forward.
I and my fellows are ministers of fate.
The actor both becomes the marionette and the puppeteer at the same time, and you can see their physicality completely driving one-to-one this digital character.
We keep working, keep trying to refine the way that Ariel moves, the way he talks, and I have no idea where it's going to go.
The technology that Intel deployed here for the Tempest is big. Take real-time information from a motion capture suit, map that on to a complex digital avatar, and then project that digital avatar out through 27 projectors.
We have their desktop i7s to take marks, skeletal information, and a machine called the Big Beast, which has 120 cores. I've never seen a technical setup like this. This place is full of huge amounts of technology, much more so than most film sets that we're on. Generally, on set, you might say, let's fix that in post. You can't do that here. The avatar has to be so robust because that's the final product.
All you can do is create the play with the tools that you have now. And what's delightful about this production is that we have pretty spectacular tools.
What the technology affords us is the ability to encapsulate Shakespeare's vision, inclusive of all that magic, that wonder.
The possibilities of what Intel have allowed are only limited by our imaginations.
We're at the forefront of something that other people can take on and build. Who knows where things will be taken in the future?
It's for other creative minds to see what we're doing and take it further.
You paused, you're on mute, Sarah.
Oh no, I just did the most classic Zoom error, apologies. So we can't do that now, but that doesn't mean we can't be ambitious. It doesn't mean that we can't be creative, but we're in a very delicate phase, I think, as arts and culture organisations. And so when we look at pre-lockdown, actually what have been trying to do at the RSC, and I think successfully achieving that, is not look at the technology, but look at the people. Look at what creative questions that we want to ask, look at how we want to do them, and bring the right people in to do that in the right way. And I see with digital, and particularly around creativity, particularly around artistic output, actually one person makes a piece of theatre. Therefore, it's quite obvious to us that we can collaborate and bring in those different people with those different skills for us to work together. And I think recognizing that in a going forward, it's about how confident we are in ourselves and what we want to achieve and how we place those frameworks there. But also that some collaborations just take longer because there's a whole process of change and adaptation of working practices that need to be taken care of. So I'll stop there because I'm conscious of time for everyone, Dominic, but I'm happy to keep going if you like.
Well, we'll come back to you because there's some stuff in that I do want to pick up about old world expectations of how long things take to make and new world expectations of that, and I think that could be really interesting. But great, Esther, hello, welcome.
Hello.
Hello there. Do you want to talk to us a little bit about the pilot theatre experience of pre-lockdown, but you can take us up to, because I know you actually changed some of the things that you were doing in order to accommodate the pressures of lockdown. So maybe you could take us on a journey leading up to it and then what happened next.
Sure. I've done a bit of a PowerPoint. Shall I, is it all right to kind of scoot you through that for a bit of a change to the visuals as well? Yeah. Great. So just bear with me 1 second. Here we go. So I was going to talk you through our Traitor project, which I think sort of will pick up this theme of how long it can take to develop things and also people. And it's something that we've worked on really for the last 4 years since I first started at Pilot. But it's a really great example, I think, of how you can bring theatre and digital together in the first place to make art, and the openness and vast and wide possibilities and the amazing learning and development opportunities for theatre teams if you lean towards, in the first place, thinking about performance from a digital perspective. So Traitor was born as an idea in 2016, and it's been actually remade in 4 different versions. It's like the narrative that keeps on giving, we always say in the office. So it started life as a live action theatre show in York. We remade it then in Norway and then in Dresden as part of Creative Europe funded festivals. And then we actually remade it as a 2-player immersive VR show that premiered at the Tribeca Film Festival in New York in 2019, but has also played local schools in Yorkshire and had another short run in York last year as well. So the original iteration of Traitor was actually the very first project I did at Pilot when I started at the company in 2016, and this is the trailer. So that was one of quite a few little teaser trailers that we sent out to sort of build excitement about the production. It was one of the first productions that we ever made that we never made a single flyer for. So the whole kind of marketing campaign happened online, and it was all very much a sort of research and development approach that we took, kind of leaning into a sort of transmedia storytelling approach in every aspect of the show. At the time I started at Pilot, as Dominic has already said, we were already very digitally advanced because we are a company that works with young audiences, and we move naturally with the trends that impact younger people and that they themselves lead, of course. And also the company had been the beneficiary of Creative Europe grants, which were fantastic and meant that we had an outward facing, sort of globally connected way of thinking about developing our work. But there's always space for kind of growth. And when I arrived, I sort of felt that some of the digital work that we did was a bit siloed. So it's sort of like we did digital and we did theatre. And what I was interested in from the beginning, and my proposition really when it went for the job, was how can you really bring those things together more meaningfully? And I wanted to explore really kind of leaning into the skills in the team and seeing how they could be sort of cross-fertilized for us to sort of make different art in a way, and make work that would still considered to be theatre, but that sort of push the boundaries of the form. And when I arrived, it was just after Brexit, and I wanted to make something that would speak to teen audiences about the pitfalls as well of the technological and digital era. I was alert to how fast the ground was changing, and how little we were sort of discussing as citizens how fast the ground was changing actually, and especially, you know, wanting to sort of explore those conversations with young people who were going to have to sort of deal with the fallout of the speed of change in terms of questions like surveillance and data, and the speed at which things were being rolled forward. And it's really interesting to be talking about this project, you know, in the year just a few months after an algorithm has, you know, made someone thought it was a good idea for an algorithm to decide the futures of young people's worth, in a way, what their worth is, through deciding the A-level results. And I think, again, it's sort of illustration of how this theme has remained kind of current. So with the first iteration of the project, we sort of took hold of the Edward Snowden question: to what extent can you trust the state when it comes to matters of your own personal data and state security? And we tried to make a show that sort of really gave balance to that question. So we actually did in the show try to present a right-wing perspective as well as a left-wing one, to get the audience really thinking and really challenging their innate biases around this whole subject. The story itself was about a young hacker who breaks into a school after hours. So it was kind of like a really radical, reinvented way of doing schools touring. The girl has a memory stick, and you need to find her and get hold of that memory stick. And what the audience is led to do is to find out this awful dilemma that she's got, and it's the audience who ultimately have to decide what to do about it. There's a ticking clock, and the equivalent of the Ministry of Defence are going to turn up. So, you know, you're against the clock, you've got to decide the right outcome. So it really put young people right into the heart of that kind of dilemma, and it was also a great way to just open up those questions for them and their understanding actually of how the world is right now. It was the very first exploration that we made of taking a game to be, in a way, the architecture for a plot, and you know, it was all based really around hide and seek, even though there was a narrative, that was a kind of formative thing, I think, for us in terms of starting to explore that space between games and theatre. And what that's led us to is another Creative Europe project called Play On, where we are looking very much at games and theatre and that intersection, and also looking at how we can train our staff. Because one of the best outcomes of this project really was that after we did the live action version, one of the kind of things that worked less well about the project was that we kind of made something where the back room was so heavy, so it required 3 technicians as well as 3 performers. It wasn't really tourable for us. We're a relatively small company, and that's a really kind of expensive show for us to do on a small scale. It just didn't work. So what was great was we knew we had a market for it, because every time we did it, hundreds of people wanted to see it, and we couldn't get them all in to see it because we could only have a capacity of 30. So we were really keen to explore, well, how can we make more of this, and how can we make it more tourable? And the team, because we'd worked on it in this very sort of highly collaborative way in the office and across the live streaming team as well as across the office team, what became really clear was there were some key members of the team who just had amazing skills that were worth developing. And Lucy Hammond, who it was at the time sort of a part-time administrator and headed up a lot of our marketing, was so passionate about the project and really hungry to develop her own sort of creative work. And this kind of aligned with the moment where immersive technology was becoming really big, and there was becoming training available in that kind of area. So I put in for us to do some training in that, and Lucy went off to the Lighthouse in Brighton to take part in a scheme that was funded by Creative England, and came back with this epiphany that we could remake Traitor, but make it as a VR game for effectively 2 players. So we spent probably about 18 months developing this idea, and made this fantastic reiteration of the project, which has remained completely true to what it was in its original incarnation, in the sense that it still has a 3-act structure, it still has the dilemma, it still has this sort of high stakes quality to it, and you still have to make the decision at the end about what you're going to do. But we can tour it on demand. We can do it whenever we want to do it. We can take it anywhere. We've got interest from all over the world. Although we can't take it to festivals at the moment, we can do it as soon as we're kind of free and flexible to do that again. So that's really exciting. I think it's just been such an asset to us, obviously, in this period, that we've thought about these sorts of projects before. And but what I want to say is that, I think Sarah's spoken to this already, is that in a way it's about, we can't be experts in everything at Pilot, but I think it's important to recognise how important it is to remain agile and to remain curious, and to create space and opportunity within your team to really explore the possibilities of an idea, because sometimes we can think in a very narrow way about what performance is, and it's just not really necessary to do that anymore. And I think if there's one sort of really big takeaway from this year, I hope that it's that. Thank you.
I love you retraining somebody as part of the project, and that reframe, that virtuous circle, that if you train people, they're going to bring something back which enables you to develop the project further, and it just becomes a really good, a virtuous circle, doesn't it? It feeds itself. Thank you for that. Shanaz, welcome from Bradford.
Oh, hi, great to be here.
Lovely to see you in Leeds. I think it'd be great to hear how you managed to play both sides of this divide in your work, and I guess where you found them, where do they come together most successfully, whether that's in your process or that you've observed elsewhere?
Well, my approach to working with digital is always starts with the idea. It's not about the tools themselves, and then the idea actually demonstrate what tools are needed, how you need to approach the collaborations you might need, how you approach the other team members that you think actually need to be a part of the process, and in order to make the work happen. And I'm also a firm believer of there's no old tech, there's no new tech. It's just how you use it, how you appropriate it, whether that's as a large organization, whether that's as an artist. And I think most interestingly in theatre, we all kind of it's quite easy to begin to use the term immersive and gaming, because it's a really easy connection to connect gaming, immersivity, audience. And I think we were on this fantastic journey pre-lockdown, actually, to kind of really exploring how virtual reality, augmented reality begins to form part of that real live experience. and to hear some of the projects that Pilot are doing. It's great to see the the RSC and some of the earlier speakers as well beginning to kind of really explore what digital actually means, because we all know the word digital covers so much. It's huge, and just the panel that are on this talk today demonstrate just how the depth and the complexity that kind of sits within that one 7-letter word. And one of the ways that I approach the work that I make and kind of think about, I don't think about kind of I'm an installation artist, I'm working in theatre, I'm working in film. I'm thinking about how is this idea best manifested, and who do I need to work with in order to make that happen? And there's a couple of projects that I want to talk about that are very much pre-lockdown, that were that I worked with National Theatre Wales, and one is a global project and one was a local project. So really very, very different, vastly different. And the first project I want to talk about is a piece that was written by Louise Walwyn called The Tide Whisperer. And Louise had been in residence in Tenby for over a year, kind of getting to know the place, getting to know the people. And the piece that she created was based on 7 characters, site-specific, and the audience experience was also site-specific. So we're talking in a hall, through the streets, on a beach, on a cliffside, on boats. So if you could talk, if you could have anything that could be as complicated, that, I'd struggle to think of anything could be more complicated than that. Then we thought, you know what, we'll just throw an extra challenge into it and we'll create a film. We'll create a series of films based on each of those characters, based on each of those stories, and do it simultaneously. So there's I think quite earlier on, someone said that actually, smaller organisations that aren't building based have an agility to them. That agility can also be about opportunity and how you kind of avail yourself of opportunity. And that moment where Cully Thiari was the director at the time, CEO and director of National Theatre Wales, thought with Louise, actually we're going to make films at the same time as creating the theatre piece. That's both a fantastic challenge, but also, as anybody who makes theatre, who makes film, you're working with the same characters, the same actors, you've the same timeline. It's quite an impossible ask, and I love a challenge like that. So what we did actually create the 6 films based on the narrative, based on the script, based on the experience that we thought the physical audience was going to have. How could we create that experience for an online audience? How could we create that experience from people who are going to be watching the films on screen? And what was incredibly important was both the script, but also the placing of the characters. One of those characters was never, one of the stories was never a physical story. It was only ever a voice, and you only ever heard it while sat on a boat. All 7 of these characters talked about how they got to that place, got to their journeys to get to that place. There's a young refugee, there's a woman who came, early Windrush. There's the mayor of the town, who was a child from World War II Spanish refugee and has grown up and has become the mayor. So each of these were kind of very much talking to the stories of the time, which was about migration, immigration, how we all kind of came to the UK. I'm going to share one of the stories. I'm going to do a screen share now. I don't ever always, it's not about my face, it's about the work that we make. And the story that I'm going to share with you is the story of Jamal. So I'll just bring up my screen share. Can everybody see that?
No.
There we go.
Ah, yes.
Yep. And I'm going to play Jamal's story for you. I'll put the volume up.
I am here, carried by the Khamsin wind, the wind that rages through the desert for 50 days and nights, searching for the end of the horizon. The horizon is like tomorrow. You never reach it. Tomorrow never comes. No matter where you are, The horizon is always over there. I'm going to build a ship. I've carried the plans in my head since I was a boy. I first saw the ship I want to build in a bottle. It was for sale at the market. And I would go to the market day after day and draw this ship in a bottle. The ship has tall sails. It has to train mighty masts. There are the finest made ladders, which take it all the way up to the central crow's nest. It was there, in my mind's eye, where I began to dream of travel. Using my drawings, I began to build that mighty ship. In miniature, of course. I spent days and weeks making it, sanding down and polishing for hours the bits of wood, steaming them into the right shape.
So I'll just pause that there and stop there. I'll be bouncing back between screen shares and sharing things with you. So that piece of work says 6 stories that are all available, still online, still available on National Theatre Wales's website. And what the most interesting challenge for this piece of work is that audience who are experiencing the live experience, how can that be recreated for an audience that would be online and experiencing it from home, from their living room, from their place? So detail, almost trying to create a smell, all that was incredibly important. But also using the power of film, using that technology for what it's best for. It was one of the ways that we thought, actually push this as far as we can and then push it a little bit further, but then also allow it to be what it is actually made for. One of the other projects I want to quickly talk you through is the Sisters. Sisters was a British Council project with India and Wales. And it was 6 women from around the UK, South Asian women, and 6 women from all over India. And we were wanting to gather stories, women's stories from both those nations, those that make things that make us the same, things that make us a difference, you know, how our lives in the UK were different, had been shaped by our environment, of our upbringing here, and what had happened, and in the same way, that kind of mirroring for the women in India. But also how to extend that. How could we crowdsource stories that is bigger than these 6 women, but included women from across these countries? You know, India is massive, it's huge, but also literacy, language, connections, contacts. So we actually set up, we wanted to create like a network, like a spider's web of contacts and connections, and we thought actually women are really good at that. Use what we're very good at, you know, kind of how we speak to people, how we engage, how we connect. So we kind of created this huge network of connections, both in the UK and in India, using each one of those women as a starting point. And we gathered up to 89 stories over the course of 6 months. From those, and each of those stories had a self-portrait. We asked each woman to create a self-portrait. And there was at the beginning, there wasn't any idea of how the fact that these self-portraits would become a part of the project itself, or would become an outcome itself. And then we started to think, when we kind of were creating the theatre piece, we realised that the really powerful things were these self-portraits, with these women's voices, and we just gathered them on mobile phones, they'd recorded their self-portraits on mobile phones. So it was their voices, but their self-portraits wasn't an image of themselves, it was objects. It was objects that they felt described them. So how could you bring these to life? How could you do it so it was interactive as well, so that it wasn't passive? How could you do it that it could also become online if we could make it possible? So augmented reality kind of naturally, in its early days, really kind of naturally lent itself to that, and to being able to kind of use all of these recordings, these photos, in their original essence. There was no kind of tidying them up, making them, you know, giving them production values, but actually using their original essence and making them so that we could actually, audiences could access those stories. So one of the things that we did, we made, I'm just going to bring up one of those self-portraits for you. So what we did, so all the women had basically, all their images and stuff had just been on mobile phones. They'd recorded their voices on mobile phones. And what I wanted to do was actually make sure that their identity was very much embedded in the image, was embedded in their self-portrait, but their voice could speak. And I didn't want any audio that kind of emanated from an image. What I wanted was the audience to be able to choose to hear in whatever way they chose to hear. So they could put their own headphones on, they could hold their phone out, so the voices of these women were in the space. And we actually used the image itself as an augmented reality identifier. So the audience downloaded the app, held up their phone, and then the voice emanated from their phone. So those images are still live, those voices are still there, and they can still be accessed from wherever you choose to access them. At the time, they were at the Wales Millennium Centre. I'm just going to show you another one quickly, so I can show you one from the UK and one from India. The one unifying thing that I asked of them, that I actually saw their hand and that I saw something behind them that felt was of that place, as well as their self-portrait. And then kind of fast forward to where we find ourselves now, where we find ourselves in lockdown, and how some of these skills that we were beginning to play with, and how we were beginning to play with them, and just what we were beginning to do to connect virtually already, to connect with people that our friends and loved ones, our colleagues across the world. And with this project, how we had started to connect with each other. How are artists beginning to use those in lockdown? How are artists utilizing tools that they were playing with before lockdown? Thinking about what some of the speakers earlier also said, how as artists do we avail ourselves of opportunity when we're at our most pressured? Because when lockdown happened, work disappeared, income disappeared for artists. How were the thing that we're very, very good at is communicating, making work, having ideas, manifesting those ideas, making them happen. So how were we going to do that? And this isn't one of my projects, but there's about a couple of projects I want to share that were made during lockdown.
You can't.
Okay.
You can finish your point, but you can't share anymore because we've got to have a chat.
Okay, all right, that's fine. My point was that actually these two projects were, and I'll put links in there anyway and talk later if I get an opportunity. One by Carolyn Mendelsohn called Through Our Lens, which is young people in Bradford who were taught photography online. It didn't matter what camera they had, utilizing anything that they had at hand, and to tell their story through their own lens of lockdown. And the other one, because I'm a big fan of horror films, is Host, which is on Shudder. Absolutely, that terrified me. I literally screamed out loud. But again, how can something that, because the thing with the horror, the thing with that, it's experiential. It's experiential. So if it's just you on your laptop, everything's dark, you're sat in a slightly dark room as it's getting darker, you utilizing experience and the technology to give an audience member an experience that you couldn't actually have in the same way in a cinema, or when you sat watching a horror movie on your screen. It's a very different thing. I'll stop there.
That's fantastic. I think the Host is a fabulous example of what can be done. I don't know if you saw the forced entertainment series of End Meeting for All, which was told purely over Zoom. It's absolutely fantastic. We are overrunning, as I thought we always seem to do. But so just one question for all of you, really, which is about times. Coming back to something Shanaz, one of the things that's coming out from what you were saying is the things that you discover through the process that you weren't anticipating when you started, and there's something about digital that produces that. And similarly, Sarah, what you were saying about just how long it takes. You have an idea that you want to do something innovative, whatever, and then you've then got to get on a long journey before you're going to get to the other end of it. And the theatre world is used to saying, okay, you've got 5 weeks rehearsal, and then it's dress, rehearsal, and stage. So what do we, how does how does that change the way that the arts need to change going forward? Do we all need to build R&D in earlier and more extensively to our processes? That's for anyone.
I mean, I don't mind going first. I absolutely think so. I think it's a bit of both, isn't it? I think sometimes as you're going through a process, we all know that whole kind of 5-week theatre process, there's always challenges. There's always those moments where there's problem solving that is needed, or you come up with a solution that you wouldn't have thought of even at the start of that 5-week process. What having a longer R&D process gives you is discovery, space to discover and room to discover, which I think is incredibly important.
Sarah, can we get a close from you on this?
Yeah, sure. I was looking at the questions as we were talking as well, so hopefully this sort of addresses some of the questions that are coming in, but I think that that it's a long-term commitment, not a short-term sort of showcasing of work and selling digital. And actually, as a sector, we are a work in progress, and we shouldn't rest on our laurels of the work that we need to do around digital inequity, skill sharing, not creating a new disenfranchised voice through new technology. And we need a debate as an arts sector about it, and how you welcome different people from different sectors into that environment. And I think, yes, I am a big fan of R&D and leading on a massive R&D project, Audience of the Future, at the moment. So research, development and innovation are really on my mind. And I can say that it's sort of like, it's not just about the artistic act, it's about what's our welcome to an audience, what's our new relationship to an audience, what are those pre-existing infrastructures that we have that we do so brilliantly, and how do we place them in another stage? And really it's about who do we want to be in this time. So research and development, also investment in people, investment in also not homogenizing the work. And I think something to really celebrate in lockdown is the huge amount of innovation that has come from the artistic community in finding those new stages and looking at those new stages. And just don't put the pressure on the commercial return immediately, because any business, it's a long-term commitment and a long-term strategy, and it takes time, and that's really, really hard. That's a really, really hard discussion, particularly at this time. But it's really worth us looking to each other and what we're doing, celebrating that risk that people are all taking.
Fantastic, thank you. We have to move on to our third section, which is where we're looking at the digitally native. Although I think it's certainly in Shanaz and what you've just been talking about, where we've already crossed over that line. I'm very pleased to say so. Thank you for that. The two newcomers to this part of the conversation are Tiina Hill and John Rose Adams, who hopefully is still there. Tiina is Senior Manager for the Digital Culture Network, which is the Arts Council of England funded digital culture network. And it exists to support and develop organizations' digital capacity, digital skills, whether that's around marketing, strategy, data analytics, communications, marketing, and so on. And also, and important, reaching new audiences that you might not have, that organizations might not have targeted in the past. Tiina looks after or manages a team of 9, I think, tech champions who each have a different digital discipline that she then deploys to kind of sort out people's problems for them. So that it's fantastic. That's quite new, isn't it, Tiina? I think it's about 2 years old, the Digital Culture Network. So it's still, I guess, finding its feet and learning itself how it best works. And then we've also got with us John Rose Adams, who's a producer for XR Stories, based at the University of York. And XR Stories is focused on research and development for the future of immersive and interactive storytelling. It's a £15 million project, which has got investment from the Arts Humanities Research Council, the BFI, Screen Yorkshire, and the University of York. And we've also got back with us, I hope, Chris Unitt, who we met earlier, who's the head of One Further. So, Tiina, I wonder if you want to start and tell us what, again, as I've asked the other speakers, kind of what was happening pre-lockdown, and then take us maybe into the journey of, what happened next.
Thanks, Dom. That was an interesting description. I love to kind of consider us as problem solvers. That's great. I love it. But yes, yeah, as you would have guessed, I'm kind of interested in digital skills development, which is obviously, it's kind of the less glamorous than the kind of creative production work, but such an essential part of it and important for the whole sector in terms of moving forward, and very much kind of links to Ash's earlier provocation. What might be really helpful if I just really quickly kind of share you a little bit about why and where the Digital Culture Network came from. So as we discussed earlier, I think over the last 10 years, there's been real pockets of excellence in the arts, but generally kind of the sector has been quite slow to capitalize on what digital and technology has to offer. And many of you will know kind of Arts Council has invested in a range of areas, from live to digital study, supporting pipeline in talent through programs like New Creatives, Creative XR, international work through South by Southwest programming, and the kind of the recent collaboration with Canada Arts Council. But I think the real kind of core piece in that puzzle is that the real sort of basic digital skills and literacy of the sector would still benefit from being further amplified. And, already before lockdown, this was kind of evidenced by various bits of insight from Arts Council received digital policies and plans, the longitudinal digital culture survey, and the Digital Culture Network was in essence kind of designed as a response to that need, and the government paper, Culture is Digital. And we felt that there were some really core digital skills needed. So the structure that we designed, like Dom explained, was a team of 9 tech champions, each with individual specialisms. Most of them we recruited from outside the arts sector, simply to kind of bring in different ideas and different expertise. And what's been really interesting, kind of particularly pre-lockdown, is the sector demand for the network has been absolutely huge, way more than what we kind of ever anticipated. We've provided support on kind of a whopping number of over 1,300 cases, over 850 organisations have engaged with us, and that's kind of happened over the last 15 months. And as you will have imagined, those cases have kind of been incredibly varied from, we've supported, for example, organisations like the Quilters Guild to improve their online retail, which, went into Christmas level sales during lockdown, to kind of doing, auditing Google Analytics for Turner Sims Concert Hall, who are now able to track the impact of their digital spending, that sort of things. It sort of varies massively. But I guess those sort of pre-lockdown things, there were a couple of trends that I wanted to pick on, and they very much chime with Ash's observations. There has been a move, albeit a very slow move, I think, towards that sort of digital integration. And there's been a slow move towards the workforce in the arts becoming more digitally skilled. And I think also developing leaders who genuinely kind of value digital. And I think those 3 things are really important in terms of the kind of the sector moving forward. And something that me and my team very much kind of advocate for. And just to pick up on that skills in the workforce bit, you know, I think unless the sector has a really digitally skilled workforce, it's just, you know, going to be really difficult to drive innovation in this area. So, you know, anything from considerations when you're hiring new staff to where kind of digital sits within job descriptions and staff objectives, all of that kind of basic considerations. And then finally, that kind of aspect of leadership who understands the value of digital. You know, leaders in the sector don't need to be digital experts, but they need to enable the organizations to move forward with digital. You know, find the time, space, capacity, resources to explore and try new ways of working. And part of that is the kind of the organizational culture, you know, giving team members space to trial and test. I don't know if you remember, but I think, was it last year or something? I just love the example of Museum of English Rural Life. You know, their Twitter went into a kind of a real Twitter viral success, simply because one of their staff members, kind of Adam Kazari, wanted to try and make it a bit more fun. But, you know, that suddenly brought the whole organization, you know, so much more profile than it had for a long time. So, yeah, so those are a few things to get us started on the conversation.
Thank you. No, that's really interesting, and you know, very interesting what you're saying about leadership and skills as well. Which, you know, we could have a couple of hours just on skills development, I think, couldn't we? But John, do you want to talk to us a little bit about what has been happening over at XR Stories, again, before, during, and after, if there ever is an after? It's a fairly new, you know, it's such a new initiative, XR Stories. I don't think people will know very much about it, so you might want to just say a little bit about that as well.
Okay, and if it's okay, can I share a screen as well? Can you see that?
Yeah.
Brilliant. Okay, so I'm just powering up my little computer in the background here, so let's see if it's working all right. Brill, it's switched on. Okay, so XR Stories is a creative industries cluster program, one of 9 across the UK. It's industrial strategy money coming through and via the Arts and Humanities Research Council, and in our case also ERDF funding. My name is John Rose Adams. I am a creative producer and the R&D projects manager for that project. Our regional focus, so it's Yorkshire and the Humber, and we are focused on immersive and interactive digital storytelling. So we predominantly fund R&D, so it's lovely to hear the words R&D mentioned at least 30 times in the last hour, into anyone that's interested in immersive and interactive storytelling. So that includes TV and film and games companies, but also really importantly, performing arts organisations more broadly. We've distributed, I think you say we're fairly young, we've managed to distribute more than £700,000 worth of cash to regional SMEs so far since 2019. We are beginning to change gears a little more, and we'll be very soon opening a virtual and physical R&D lab space, the physical bit of that being in York, and subject to various rules around social distancing. But that's all for the region and the Leeds City region in particular. I've got 3 bits I was going to cover really quickly, Dom. So a little bit about some of the projects and what they're covering, the emerging trends as far as my part of the world and what I can see in terms of post-COVID innovation, and then maybe some magic ingredients to innovating with emerging technologies, if that's useful. So I'll just fire up the first one. It's handy to have a little computer helping me in the background. So we've funded 45 projects to date, and it is really wonderful that the performing arts organisations of our region were on the front foot with all of that R&D interest. So you've heard from Esther already from Pilot Theatre. We've worked with them to fund some of that work around Traitor that she was talking about. But we've also worked with Opera North, York Medial, Freedom Studios, IOU Theatre, Megaverse, Kit Monkman Associates, Vanitas Arts, and various others. And that really shows to me the enthusiasm for adopting new digital storytelling within the remit of these organisations, which obviously includes physical live performance. As we move into 2021, our focus and interest will be around new and diverse XR storytellers, and we'll be pursuing funding R&D that delivers that, particularly around the Leeds City region, and through our lab space, and with TV and film and performance as our kind of clear priorities. So hopefully squarely in the kind of areas that we're all interested in. Now, in terms of sort of trends, right, so I pick up from the work that we've been involved in, which has obviously kind of taken us through the COVID period of early throughout India and up to date. Some of the innovations that we're talking about as being pressing and urgent as a result of COVID actually have their origins before COVID, and some of our R&D projects have been exploring those. And that's because I think those projects were driven by a desire to reach new audiences digitally. And although the majority of projects were originally developed with both present and absent audiences and performers in mind, when COVID hit, they were able to focus more closely on the wider set of possibilities that the absent audience and performer and the digital really brought through in their R&D. So they were focusing on questions like, where are the audience, right? So are they all together? Are they all separate? Are they in small groups? Are they in their homes? Are they out and about? Are they in specific places and spaces? Or are they all these things all at once? And what do we do about it as storytellers? When are the audience is really important. The digital gives us live synchronous, asynchronous, and both potentially within a performance. And what are the audience? So are they active in the performance, or are they passive? Are they able to commune with other audience members during a performance or after or separately or in parallel, wherever they are? Can they choose their own level of interactivity or personalize their experience? And these are all R&D questions, right? These are all the things you can explore with the benefit of some headspace to do that. So that's been the first observation. The innovation was starting to happen, and it's been really useful and accelerated by COVID. My second observation is that tools are becoming key. So not simply the performance of work that has to be packaged and distributed to meet physically distanced contexts, but the production of work itself needs to offer tools that enable, sorry, my family have returned home, if you can hear them in the background, virtual teams, now so production teams to create, rehearse, produce performances separately. So tools are becoming an emerging trend as well, creator tools in particularly. I just want to quickly shout out to one of our projects, which the Bradford-based Freedom Studios and working with Carbon Imagineering, which are boutique R&D consultancy, to develop new interactive, mobile captured, mobile distributed theatre. It entailed needing to develop a new technical solution and an app for its delivery to its audiences, and necessitated developing new theatrical language in order to translate theatre to this new format, and it's producing something highly relevant today, for today, right? And I would add that it's at the grassroots end of theatre production as well, right? So this is about throughout all of these strands we've been talking about, there's at the back of our minds we're thinking about accessibility and the digital divide, and it's been mentioned a few times. So here's some grassroots theatre responses to the threats and challenges that COVID presents. And very quickly, Dom, if I've got time, in terms of innovation, right, a little tool set for us. Oh, my computer has just changed over. Wait for it. This is blinking on and off. Okay, so primarily, and this echoes some. Oh, sorry, my screen sharing stopped. Has it, Dom?
Has.
Can I reshare? Forgive me. Oh, I'll speak to it, Dom. I'm not quite sure what's happened.
That's all right.
Technical moment. The so yeah, vision and audience first, tech second. So echoing something Shanaz mentioned, as we innovate within the ever expanding boundaries of what are the technical things that we can use, the toys, the VR goggles, the mixed reality headsets can offer us. The main thing is, what's the story we want to tell, and where are the audience? And I would wrap that very much around accessibility and the need to not leave anyone behind in the stories that we're telling. Multidisciplinary all the way. So to echo what Sarah was saying, you know, it's the R&D that we're supporting doesn't happen, cannot happen without bringing together new teams. So, and that's including, you know, bringing games developers together with theatre companies, and Unity developers together with companies that have never needed to produce anything in a 3D game engine. 3D game engines themselves have become the new core skill for many of these creative organizations, and we touched on that just before. And Tiina mentioned about the technical abilities and digital skills. 3D game engines are the vehicle that realizes so much of what new digital technologies promise. We would be firm advocates for the hack and play form of R&D, so open-ended, not highly focused on a specific product, but to find out what the product needs to be by listening to the audience and creating a story with a vision. I guess seeing interactive storytelling as an emerging role in itself. And there's a lot of borrowing from the video game sector at the moment, where interactive branching, non-linear narrative is bread and butter for that sector, but is now something more and more interesting to other creative sectors. And creating new creative approaches and tools, because they're needed to enable us to create the new stories specific to new mediums, the new digital, the new socially and physically distanced way we live right now. And so that's me. That's all I was going to say, Dom.
That's great. No, I'm really keen. I really like that you're talking as much about the kind of social impact there as, you know, not leaving people behind, reaching out across, you know, not just across sectors, but you know, whether that's ages or the diversity agenda and so on. I think that's all really, really powerful. Chris, talk to us about collaborations, about unexpected collaborations, new opportunities for collaborations. What you're seeing in that world, and where you're seeing new shoots emerging.
So this has actually been one of the areas that I've had a few worries about. We were talking earlier about how interest resource tends to get concentrated when we're looking at online properties. And I think the only way that, especially many smaller organizations, but even the big ones, when Fiona was saying that some of the streaming platforms cost 40 grand a year, that's not a huge budget for many companies in the world. The biggest arts organizations are not far off SMEs in the wider scheme of things. So the arts organizations across the sector, really, they're competing on bigger scales digitally. So I think the collaboration aspect of it is going to be particularly important. All the stuff that we just heard about, the kind of skills that are required for developing this digital activity, they're not native to many organizations as well. So just pulling in partners who can deliver this work. But I'm particularly interested at the moment in terms of just how this stuff is distributed. There's a spate at the moment of many organizations who are hurriedly spinning up their own video platforms that are connected to their own box office systems, or spinning up their own digital membership options. And my worry is that if every organisation is expected to do that, there are going to be winners, which you could probably count on one hand, and there are going to be a lot of losers. The winners are going to be the web agencies who are selling this stuff and stuffing their pockets with the cash for it, but the organisations are going to struggle to get much of an income off the back of it, or it's just going to be where a lot of funding gets chewed up. So if we look at, I love the work that English National Ballet have been doing over the past 6 months. I think Ramseyer had been doing some interesting things as well. But just to take two examples that I have no personal affiliation with particularly, they both operate within the same kind of subject matter, and they're both looking to engage very similar audiences with very separate programs. And not to pick on them particularly, but you can see this multiplied out across the sector. Compare that with, I always hesitate to point to the really obvious ones, but NT Live. David Sable, who was one of the people who initiated that back in the day, he had quite a good conversation with Ash at one of Ash's events not so long ago. And he made the observation that when they put NT Live together and they were doing cinema broadcasts, they found that they had created this platform and this pipeline and this distribution channel, but they didn't have the, to be horribly reductive about it, the product to push down this pipeline. And by partnering with others who might otherwise have been their competitors, the Donmar Warehouse, was it the, what was the Helen Mirren West End thing, The Queen? Or something else, I can't remember. But they worked with Nottingham Playhouse as well. They were the conduit for that. No one else had to spin up the huge amount of infrastructure required for this, especially if you're the Donmar that isn't producing that a huge quantity of these kinds of productions. And everyone won. And I know there are platforms like Operavision Digital Theatre and those kinds of things. I'd love to see some of the revenue figures that people are getting back from using those kinds of platforms. They do a job, but I don't think anyone's going to be selling their buildings off and just thinking we'll sell our stuff through there. So I think that collaboration piece is really interesting. The way that in terms of optimistic shoots of activity, I think one of the really interesting things that I've seen is people looking around the country and seeing that. So if you're doing a project that's going to be delivered digitally, there are two opportunities there. One is the chance to work with people who would be too geographically remote from you ordinarily. So I know I was talking to a museum in Scotland who were talking about the schedule of talks that they do. Just thinking, if you wanted someone to come and do a talk, unless they were local, they'd have to come up on a train, probably stay over. Like the cost of bringing someone in goes higher and higher. But actually now maybe they can be a little bit more ambitious about who they're going to work with. And then on the distribution side, there are organizations that are doing virtual tours. And if you think of what the role of an arts venue is, in particular, the arts, especially the receiving houses around the country, and the ones that are sort of really struggling at the moment, they are they connect audiences with artists, and that is a role that they are struggling to play at the moment. Their what's on sections on their websites are just lists of cancelled shows. Whereas if you're an artistic company delivering, and what you're selling is not so much a ticket, more a link, like the Zoom link for this afternoon, there's no particular reason why you can't, well, there are reasons, but theoretically, you could reach out to 100 organisations, Hertford Theatre down the road from me, Theatre in Guildford, Theatre in York, and everyone could be selling tickets to that same event with their allocations. We're starting to see little bits like that. And I think that is just one simple way that a piece of work can reach a much larger audience than than if people were just producing it for their own existing audiences. And through some sort of, most of these schemes have some sort of small kickback in exchange for selling a ticket for someone else's show, then you're reaching a much wider distribution. So we're starting to see things like that, and it's nice to see that kind of thing. I'm hoping to see more steps like that.
Ash mentioned at the beginning about the Wise Children kind of virtual tour that production is having. So, you know, there's also an environmental impact there, or rather a carbon positive impact of touring without touring.
I was meant to be speaking at a conference in Gdansk on Monday. Right. Well, it was meant to be back in April, but they're doing it online and it's on Monday, and I'm feeling a lot better about myself being able to sit at my desk here and do it. The other thing that I'm kind of on the lookout for at the moment, and Ash mentioned that I did one of these. Ash talked about the formats of the productions that have been made, and the capturing the live and translating it to something that's to online. But I'm also really interested in the more web native formats that are being developed, and we heard a few of those. You mentioned that I did one of these online detective things that was done by a company that's formed by a couple of punch drunks creative associates. I would urge everyone to go and do this, and if you can expense it back to your organization, treat it as research, then do that. It's fascinating. And I think when we're talking about digital literacy, I think one of the tasks that people should be given in an organization is to look at something like Plymouth Point by Swamp Motel and break that down into its component parts and understand what that production is. It's delivered by Zoom. It features actors. They're doing about 4 shows a day throughout, well, from now until the end of October. But there's all sorts of interesting aspects to it. It's 35 quid a ticket. It's you play it with your friends. There's a social element to it. It's a lean forward, not a lean back experience. It got a 4-star review in the Guardian's theatre section as well for an online detective mystery. It's also, from what I can make out, very easy to deliver. Behind the scenes, there is someone manning a bit of Zoom chat. Otherwise, the video is pre-recorded. There's only 5-10 minutes worth of video in it. You can do back of a napkin kind of calculations on how this is working. One of the things that I've always joked about is that arts organizations like I'm a consultant, I run an agency. I know various other people who kind of exist in this kind of supporting the arts ecosystem. I've always said that arts organizations are dreadful, dreadful clients because they're not built to scale. Like a lot of other industries, if you're working on digital marketing comms, building websites and things, you can start working with an organization. The better your work, the more that organization will grow, the more customers it will have, the more revenue, the more they will invest in your work, and you can grow with that client. I don't know a single agency that has grown with an arts organization. They have a ceiling on the number of seats that they're able to fill most years, and all sorts of other aspects related to their business model. It just doesn't work like that. If you're after money bags, it's not the sector to be working in. However, I am interested to see if with things like the delivering artistically creative formats that also tick boxes in terms of revenue and distribution, like the Swamp Motel stuff, I think there possibly is the ability to scale something up from humble beginnings. Swamp Motel, I was really intrigued to see the. I mean, I did that back in I don't know June or something. I kind of lost track of all of that. I got an email from them the other day announcing the sequel. It was genius. Like, how many times do you see a sequel in theatrical terms? But they want to develop that world further, and you can see them developing that world if they're successful. They've got 2 shows they can show simultaneously now. They could tour that around venues and festivals, which I know they've done. but there's also the ability to spin that out into other media as well. If they do enrich that, then I could see that becoming a podcast, like some of the non-fiction podcasts that are out there, funded by Audible or Spotify or something. Or you could see other translations of that into other formats. So there's some really interesting stuff that could come out of this. It's those kinds of organizations that I'm keeping an eye on, because they're the agile little ones that have got the capability to do some really interesting stuff.
Brilliant, thank you. I'm just looking at the questions that have been coming in. That is really helpful. Thanks, Chris. I'm going to ask, Tiina, maybe I'll start this with you, but I'm very interested in what other people think as well on the panel. And Sarah, I know you've been doing a lot of work in this area. Well, is there a skills deficit? You know, who's going to be going into this area, and are they being trained appropriately? Are the opportunities there to go through I suppose what I'm thinking is, if you wanted to be an actor or a musician, you know that probably when you're about 15 or 16, and then you start training, and then you go to drama school or music college or whatever, and you end up doing that. I imagine that if you're going to be at the cutting edge of what's happening in terms of digital art or live art or whatever, you're probably more of a techie than you are an artist at the moment. And then you go on, or is it both sides? What's your vision of that, and what do you think and are the channels there for people to follow a career path through? Does it make sense?
I think that you're right. I think there probably still is a skills deficit at a range of levels, whether it's from the kind of use of creative technology to actual, some of the core digital skills that I was talking about, all the way up to the kind of leadership level. And, the fact that, say, when we were recruiting our tech champions, we did end up going outside the arts, simply because we felt that, some of those skills just didn't exist as much in the arts. There are pockets of excellence, and and will be. So yeah, I think there is something to be said about us continuing to prioritize digital skills in the arts. And I think how we can use those digital skills for that kind of future resilience and innovation in the sector. And I guess linked to that, just quickly back to what Chris was saying about collaboration. How can we be better at sharing our expertise, inside the sector, and, sharing those lessons learned, so that the digital skills that already exist in the sector are, shared wider.
Thank you, Sarah.
Yeah, I had a comment around the opportunities for the arts and culture sector and skills. So as well as us needing skills, actually the gaming industry is looking to our sector for our skills, because and it's that less siloed approach, which I think, and again, the collaboration models allow for that, because when you're in that time of change, actually it's in the edges that you see the opportunity, and it's in the edges that you can get some real change happening. And we've been approached by gaming companies recently on the back of projects like the Tempest on what we're doing with Audience of the Future, and making an entire production with virtual production tools and in-game, not making a game, but making the performance in a game engine, and that's quite significant. But what I would say is that, because of that, because we've put work out there, gaming companies are coming to us going, well, I would like our work, how do you look at costume? How do you look at stagecraft? How do you look at lighting? How do you make gaming more theatrical? Now, that's an interesting conversation about skills. And we also ran pre-lockdown a series of fellowships working in collaboration with Magic Leap and the University of Portsmouth and Goldsmiths. We were able to give a paid opportunity 2 days a week for a series of people that were either coming from a theatre background or had completely no background in theatre, but these fellowships allowed them to embed in the cultural practices of the organisation and all of the partners that were taking part, and create work and understand it better. And that just goes out in the sector. And I think that, like working with Tiina and working with all our different, knowing what our purpose is right now, knowing when we have to learn, but also what we can provide the sector is crucial. But the pathways have to start at school and have to start when you are thinking about your future self. And like you say, if you're thinking about becoming an actor, it's possible for you, if you're learning coding, if you're learning those skills, that the arts is a place for you, and it's about that. And so it does start a lot further away, and that's why, again, championing that and putting the work out there that speaks to those audiences is crucial. Rant over.
Esther, I know that you want to say something, but I just want to ask John on that, because John's kind of meeting students as well as the projects that you're developing. You've got students coming through the thing as well, and it really strikes me that the thing about XR stories is the word story, and what Sarah was just saying about, the gaming industry needs the storytellers and it needs the theatre people. Are you finding that you're, are you drawing into to XR stories people from arts backgrounds, let's say, for want of a better word?
Yeah, and it's like it's the essential part of it, because one doesn't live without the other, right? So you need the artists and the creatives to come with wild ambition. You need seasoned story writers and traditionally skilled TV and film makers and things like that who understand various aspects of their craft. And you need the 3D game engines, you need the developers and stuff, because it's only actually when you mesh them all together that you do create that thing, that new thing. What you can do with a magic leap is, if you're a technologist, is put it on, make a thing move around in space, and it's cool. If you give it to the RSC, they can make these like fantastic things that can come out and really stretch it. So it's a necessary part of that. I'd add that the elements of skills, they do need to be even more placed in the sort of hands of students. That pipeline of skills has to just be a core part of that, and it will be, because Unity is huge and it's everywhere. I mean, it floated on the stock exchange, didn't it, like last week? So, and that is, it's ubiquitous now, and people are aware of that, and that means that the skills agenda will wrap around those kind of skills, and universities will make them core to their relevant courses and all of that. So yeah, it's what XR Stories, it's kind of what the pitch was for the project, right, in the first place. Yeah.
And Esther, you wanted to say something on training?
I just wanted to remind us not to underestimate young people, how extraordinary they are, and the sort of bedroom geniuses who are out there. So, for example, I'm on the steering group for a wonderful company called Stand and Be Counted Theatre, who work with refugees. And they brought to me a couple of teenagers who are refugees, who are absolutely extraordinary video games makers. And, thank God for Stand and Be Counted, because how else would those kids be able to access culture? So, and it often is kids actually who, are having a tougher start, who might lean into those sorts of areas because they see, they're not daft. They see, I might be able to make some money out of this. So, I think it's kind of been covered already by other members of the panel, and we must have proper digital skills in schools, absolutely, but don't underestimate the youth of Britain and those youth of the world, actually, and what we might learn from them, and how we might work with them is the question, maybe.
Oh, that's fantastic. Yeah, I was reading this morning that the term digital native was coined in 2002, so that's a couple of generations already, the digital native. Guys, we've got to stop, unfortunately. There is one outstanding question about distribution, which we'll try and get back to the questioner of that about going forward, but we do have to stop for now. It's been a marathon, but it's been absolutely fantastic for me anyway. I've learned a huge amount. I hope that people watching this at home have found it interesting as I have, and helpful. And yeah, great. So thanks to all the fantastic panel. Thank you for giving up your time to do that. Thank you to the audience, viewers, spectators, for the questions, for the chat that's been going on all through it, and for giving up your time to share in this conversation as well. Yeah, back to the Leeds Digital Festival and over and out from Opera North. Thanks, everybody.